Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest Great Place to Work webinar. Brilliant, I can begin to see people joining us. Delighted to have you with us this morning. First things first, as usual, please can somebody pop on the chat or the Q&A and let us know that you can see our screen and that you can hear me this morning. While you guys are logging on and making sure you can do that, I'm going to give you the weekly weather update from here in Mayo. We had a beautiful weekend. Newport was the hottest place in Ireland on Saturday, and then sadly it got very cold then Monday, Tuesday, but the sun is back today, so we're absolutely delighted to see that this morning. Okay, I'm just going to check my chat here. Good morning, Dean. Hi, Orla. That's great. Morning, Jackie, Naomi. Brilliant. Morning, Septa. Good to see you. Okay, so welcome to the next installment in our Staying Connected series. So this morning's webinar is all about credible leadership and building a culture of trust and empowerment. My name is Faina Stoney. I'm lucky enough to know most of you on the call today, but I'm a consultant here with Great Place to Work, and we're delighted to welcome our 2020 Great Place to Work Ambassador, Jarlath Dooley of version 1 with us this morning. Cahill's going to do the official intros, and as usual, we'll welcome Cahill back to the Great Place to Work webinar team. Okay, so to date, the webinar series has really brought you kind of a breadth of I suppose, expert insight from a range of different sources. And we're really beginning to get the feedback in that we want, or you guys want to see that kind of lived experience and some really tangible stuff. So we've really directed our webinars over the next few weeks to respond to that. So to give you a sense of what's coming up, we have obviously Jarlath this morning, who's going to talk about the version 1 story overall and then how their culture has really driven their own decision-making processes during the current context. But we've also got, looking forward, we're looking towards rebooting business safely. That's our one that's on next week. And that's going to be all about supporting employees to deliver results while staying healthy and safe. And again, we're going to get some experience or some insight from some Great Place to Work leaders for that as well. And then coming up on May 28th, we're going to have a session all around engagement, communication and everything in between, the role of the Great Place to Work team and the Great Place to Work Champion Network. Again, we're going to be joined by a couple of organisations on that, just to bring you some insight for those. A little bit of housekeeping from me. So we are going to wrap up within the hour. The slides and the recording will be available afterwards, but in the pre-chat with Jarlath, I think it's worth having a notebook. There are going to be some key takeaways for you guys, so make sure you have a notebook handy. And please do keep the questions coming in. I know you guys have been fantastic with the levels of questions and engagement we've had, and we've got a couple pre-submitted as well. Just one thing to let you know about in the chat function. The chat function is auto-queued to only send the question to us as panelists. If you're happy enough for that to be shared out to panelists and attendees, you just go to that drop down and pop it to panelists and attendees, and it goes out to everybody. Then you can also use the Q&A function, whatever works for you guys. Okay, and with that, I am going to hand over to Cahill. So see you at the end, everybody. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Fanny. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is well, safe, healthy. So I think this morning is a great demonstration of what we mean when we talk about the Great Place to Work community. So we have, we're delighted to have Jarlath with us, a leader who's come on to share his insights, share his experiences from his journey so far. And we've got a great number of participants on the call, and I think the word participants is important. We really want your comments, your suggestions, your thoughts. Let's try and make this as much of a conversation as we can. So today's speaker, Jarlath Dooley, is a People Success Director with version 1. Interesting title, People Success. Joined version 1 in 2008 and has had multifaceted roles in terms of IT and systems, marketing, premises. And I think that broad remit of roles that Jarlath has held sort of speaks to Jarlath's view in terms of HR, that HR needs to really understand the business in order to be effective. And I'd absolutely agree with Jarlath on that. So HR really needs to understand the business in order to be effective. Version 1 have been a veteran in terms of Great Place to Work, listed for 9 years now. Jarlath has been a great ambassador in terms of that. And we were delighted in February 2020, February of this year, to acknowledge Jarlath as the 2020 Great Place to Work Ambassador. He usually brings his award everywhere he goes. I don't see it there in the video, but he might let us know where it is. We'd be interested in that. The people strategy within version 1 is underpinned by a culture of trust and empowerment, and effectively all business decisions that they make, they think about the impact that it'll have on their culture, including any actions or decisions they've taken recently in terms of the COVID situation. So Jarlath's belief is that any action that takes away from the brand of credible leadership completely undermines any efforts to build trust and empowerment. And that's the basis of what Jarlath's going to share with us today. So look, as Fania said, please use the comment function. Let's have as much of a conversation as we possibly can on this Thursday morning. Thanks a lot for joining us, and Jarlath, delighted to hand over to you.
Okay, thank you, Cathal, and welcome to everybody. I echo what Cathal said. I hope everybody is well and surviving. I think week 7 or 8, I don't know how many of us are still thriving in the lockdown and working from home. I know the last week myself, I have struggled greatly with it, but you know, I think we're starting to see some hope, and I'm actually doing an office reopening plan at the moment, so that's interesting to work on. Look, today I'd just like to reflect a little bit on trust and empowerment, and maybe where it's at, and then get into a little bit about, you know, what we have done over the years on that. And you know, when I join these webinars, I like to have a takeaway or a few takeaways. So I have a number of takeaways, some which I hope will resonate with people, that maybe you can take back and start to use in your own organization, because they certainly worked for us, so I think they'll work for others. What I'm going to cover is, you know, as I said, just a quick look at you know, why it matters even more today, and particularly in the middle of the crisis we're in, and maybe what's to come. And then I want to focus on 2 particular areas that, because look, trust it's a massive area, you know, and in the time we have, I just want to pick 2 particular areas that I think will resonate with people, and from that you can get takeaways that you can start to build into your own strategy and thinking. And then to talk through, as I said, the examples from version 1, because I know Fania said there about people being interested in what's being lived by companies and by leaders, and I'll focus quite a bit on that near the second half. So look, where are we at with trust? And I think it is important to look at it in a global context, because you know, the last 2 decades have seen trust very much eroded. And you know, if you look at two of the big ones in the UK and the USA, and where they're at and how they're managing the COVID crisis, or mismanaging it, and you can probably see why, you know, populism is on the rise, and why people would have serious trust issues. And look, right across the globe, the middle one there is actually a candidate who ran in Brazil, and that was his phrase: "It can't get any worse," and got elected. And you know, we've elected our own clowns in Ireland as well. We can't just look at overseas and say that they're getting it wrong. And it is, I think, at the very top level, which is, you know, governance and political leadership, we're seeing a complete undermining of trust, and that goes down to right through the establishment. If you look at the experience of the church, which, you know, for so long was a heavily trusted establishment, right through to our police force and what they've gone through, you can see that we have at a global level a major issue with trust, and when you look at why, in nearly all cases it stems from the leadership, and what leaders and what actions leaders have taken in the last 2 decades that have caused those establishments and organizations to fall into that position of mistrust. And it is, right down into the corporate world. And, we just need to look at the Enrons or the Wells Fargos, or how the banks behaved in the financial crisis, probably how they're going to behave now. But, it is being discussed right across that trust in business is a huge issue. And, if you look at, what's coming through in terms of millennials and other generations, in a recent survey, 75% of the millennials said they did not trust corporates. So is it any wonder that they come in and they stay a year or 18 months or whatever and move on, because they don't have that trust in the corporate? And, I have the Great Place to Work logo there, because the basis of that is trust. And that's the basis upon which we joined it probably 11 years ago, was to build out on that trust. And yet, how often people don't talk about trust when they talk about the Great Place to Work, but they talk about periphery things that companies do. I frequently get asked, how do you compete with the big multinationals and the Salesforce and the Workdays? And sometimes then people just miss the whole idea of the Great Place to Work, which is built on trust and creating trust in your organization, not on the periphery frills and benefits that people sometimes focus on. So it is certainly, it is something that I suppose the point is, we don't have natural trust anymore in either corporates, in governance, in institutions or establishments. And we have got to work really, really hard to restore that trust in our own companies. And, this is from a Harvard study, so you can get stats to support anything, but, I suppose at the end of the day, it is common sense that if you have a high trust environment, you are going to enjoy a lot of benefits, both for people, but also for the corporate, in terms of productivity, in terms of engagement, and in terms of people's stress levels, and in terms also of them staying with you longer. So the benefits are there. They've been researched, they've been documented, but at the end of the day, in a PwC global survey, 55% of the CEOs think of lack of trust is a threat to their organization's growth. So even though people see the importance, even though most CEOs see it as a threat, very few are doing anything about it. And that was one of the things that came out of that report, is that there isn't a strategy really to deal with it. And probably the reason for that is it's such a big topic to deal with, because, as Cathal would attest in Great Place to Work, you can't build engagement in a quarter. So these things, trust, engagement, you build them over time. So in the fast moving business world we're in today, it's very difficult for CEOs to take that long-term view and say, let's have a 3 or 5 year strategy on culture change and building trust, because as soon as you have said that, you have an immediate numbers or business metric coming at you that focuses on the next quarter, get the next quarter, get the next quarter. So I understand why it is so hard for people to deal with it. And it can also be a topic that, where do you start? It's such a big topic. Where do you actually start to focus on it? So, as I said, for today, for the time we have, I've picked two. One is the area of psychological safety, which deals with trust in teams. And the second one then is the role of the leader. So, if you can start to improve the trust actions of the leader, and you can improve the trust within a team, I think you've probably gone well down the road. So that's why I picked these two areas to focus on. Google did a study, and so we all know Google, like to have data, and particularly our data, but they looked at their own data and they studied right across the company what teams performed the best and why. And they probably, fair to say, those who aren't familiar with it, but they probably started out thinking you get the best engineers, you put them together, you get the best results. But that wasn't what they found at all. What they found was that the teams that performed the best had the highest level of psychological safety. And you know, I have had discussions with my own CEO on this, and he initially poo-pooed it as HR fluffy stuff, because it just sounds psychological safety. It does sound a little bit like that. But what it actually means is that the environment is safe enough for people to challenge each other. It's safe enough for people to demand the best from each other. It's safe enough for people to take a risk, to push the envelope a little bit, to stick their neck out. And that's the teams that did the most and had the most impact in Google. So it's not about it being a safe team to work in. It's about it being a safe team to make a mistake. It's about having a team culture where you're not punished because you've messed up. It's about where you're not concerned about saving face or saving your team's face. You're concerned about achieving the team's goals. So, you know, there's other layers to this. Psychological safety isn't enough. You need to have very clear team goals. You need to know where you're going. Obviously, you'll need the leadership, but the underpinning of high-performing teams was psychological safety. Now, I've interviewed, you know, thousands of people in my 12 years in version 1, and the most common issue I get from people over and over is, you know, they might have a great manager, they might be paid well, have good benefits, but the most common thing people talk about is the environment they're working, or the culture, or the climate. And it's about things like, oh, it's very political, or, you know, our team is always trying to defend itself against another team, or there's backstabbing, or politics, or gamesmanship, or one-upmanship, or what, you can put all the common language around it, but it is about basically working where it's not psychologically safe. So what they find is that they are retreating to perform their job in the safest way. And, you know, and that is not challenging. That's not exciting. That is continuously stressful. And it doesn't promote innovation. It doesn't promote initiative. And very often what goes hand in hand with that culture is layers of bureaucracy. So more and more procedures to report back. And that disempowers people. So you have low trust and disempowerment, and you get average performance. So that whole basis of setting teams up and setting your culture up, whereby you are promoting psychological safety. It's a huge area. It does require culture change. And once we hear the words culture change, we all go, oh God, how am I going to do that? It does take time, but without it, I don't believe you can build trust across the business. And I don't believe you can empower people unless you get to start to improve your levels of psychological safety. The second area that goes with that is the role of the leader. And, you know, leadership sets the tone. And I've always believed that, you know, no matter how big a company gets, the top leadership sets the tone and everybody else mimics that. And, you know, if the top leadership does not create positive relationships, then that is going to filter right down through the organization. I think the second one is hugely important, because how often do we promote the best career managers rather than the best managers? And I think that is something that a lot more rigor and critical analysis needs to be applied to, is how people are promoted to the position of leadership. And nowadays people, you know, employees, particularly if you have an empowered workforce, are far more demanding and far more open to challenge why was that person promoted to that role. But the last one, I think, is the real key, and it's the one I'll talk about a bit later, because if there was one word that could apply to version 1 and to our leadership since we engaged with the Great Place to Work, is consistency. And that is about doing what you say you do and follow through on your commitments. And you know, I would say in this current environment, more so than at any other time, people are looking for consistency in your actions, and you know, saying one thing and doing something the following week or the following month is just, it's a complete trust destroyer. So consistency in your ethos and follow through to your actions is, I think, one of the most important things in building trust, and it's something we've been very focused on in terms of leadership in version 1. So in terms of those two things, there's a number of things that I suppose underpin a culture of trust and empowerment. And the first one I have is strategic intent. And I'll reference how these are, you know, how we've used these in the past, but culture is an equal and enduring part of corporate strategy. And, you know, probably every CEO can quote Drucker and say, culture eats strategy for breakfast, but how many of them actually then go and say, therefore, I'm going to put culture ahead of strategy, or even on an equal footing with sales strategy, with financial strategy, market strategy. So it's, you know, this is culture. This is what we're talking here. And it must be up there and discussed at the leadership level. It must be in the leadership strategy. It must be in the leadership plan. It must be part of their conversation. And they must feel that they own that. And it's as important as pursuing a sales strategy to drive up a number. The second thing is supporting values. And probably the most common feedback we get from people who join version 1 after 3 months or 6 months or 9 months is that the values are not just on the wall, they are actually lived. And I think that is a really important part of trust, because if you have values that you know, if you have a customer value, but the action on the ground is, you know, throw the contract at them, make sure they can't get out of it, then you can't build trust in any other area. So, you know, the values and the actions must align, and they must be lived. And likewise, you know, we're talking about leadership, credible leadership. If leadership isn't held accountable, and that is for its actions, that is for its ethos, for living its values, for what it does around culture and promoting culture, if it's not held to account, then why should the rest of the organization even care about it? So leadership accountability and people seeing that's its accountability. I think, you know, and just personally speaking, I think it's probably the biggest destroyer of trust when a poor leader, or a leader who may be a brilliant performer, but doesn't align with the values or the culture, and they're left in that position. I think it's a real trust destroyer. Enduring consistency, and, you know, again, very often things are started, stopped, people adjust their direction according to the latest business results, you know, but having an ethos and a set of actions across all your small things over a long time, because that's what builds trust, is the actions you take in the everyday level over a long time. So if you seek to understand a person and you ask about their family, you ask about their welfare, you encourage them to take time off, you know, you don't make them take a half day when they're going to the doctor and all, then they actually will believe you care about them as a person and not just an employee. So it is all the small things you do over a long time that people assess in terms of trust. And you know, there was a thing I read which said that for each trust erosion, so each action you take that erodes trust, you will have to do 7 positive actions to get it back to where you are. Now, it may be 5, it may be 9, but it's definitely not 1 and 1. So if you do something that erodes trust, you've got to do 3, 5, 7 times to get it back again. So that consistency is a hugely important point. Impactful HR, and this is something that I think probably most people on the call are familiar with, that whole debate between how impactful or other HR is, but I believe HR has to be really impactful, has to be business savvy, has to be a driving force in the organization. You know, HR has to get that culture on the corporate strategy, and it has to influence the senior leadership to do that and treat it with the importance, because we are the governors of the culture. We are the drivers, the crafters. We are the people who set up the architecture for the culture. And if you're not influential, then you're not going to achieve it. And then the last thing is your processes, they need to be relevant. You can't have processes that undermine your ethos. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. So what we have done, that strategic intent has been there since we started on our journey. That culture is an equal part of our strategic triangle. So people, customers, and financials all have the same importance. And originally there was 3 directors: me as people, a sales director, and a COO. Our values underpin absolutely everything we do in the company. They're built into recruitment, promotions. They're in induction. The CEO does the induction every week, purely on values. All our leaders are held to account against our leadership principles. And, it is at CEO level, you're called up when you're not living the values or when you do something against them. In terms of consistency, we've done a dozen culture audits, probably 50 items in each one. So over the years, probably 600 small things we've done that just continuously build on the trust. And, absolutely HR is impactful in version 1. Some people say too impactful. And some of the processes I'll touch on later. But I think it's probably a point to just stop for a minute if there's any questions. And the next piece is getting into, the specific things we did that people might get takeaways from.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jarlath. Yeah, the questions are definitely coming in. So I've got a couple to hit off with. I mean, firstly, the idea of the 7-to-1 ratio, that's a pretty big ratio, right? So it's kind of good to hear that insight. Okay, so the first one, and I know you're going to get into kind of the details of what version 1 have done. I think this is where people are really beginning to go with their questions. So the first is somebody noticing the timing of when you took this on. If we go back 11 years, the country was in a very different type of context. And this idea of how did you manage to bridge that quarterly pressure and then also get leadership to take that longer term view, especially given the context that you were in at the time?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to make that point later when I was talking about impactful HR, but I went to the then CEO, Justin Keating, who's a hard numbers man, and we were in a crisis, and I said, I want to invest money in the Great Place to Work. And, I was met with dismay, and I think he thought I'd lost it, but I was saying, look, when we come through this, we want to come through it in a way that we've retained our best people, and that when the market takes up, that we can attract in the best people. And now is the time to do it, not to wait until the recovery comes. And that's where the strategic triangles came out of, because when we got into it, it was like, no, it's not about I'm not asking you to build a gym, Justin, or that we start giving the best benefits in Ireland, or that, you know, and it's funny, just that's what people think, great place to work. They think spend loads of money and have all the frills. And, you know, we talked about what it meant to be a great place to work. And that's where the whole element of trust and empowerment, that people could come in, they could be themselves, be their best, work for leaders they respected and trusted, and that we would have a growth culture that would be exciting for people to work in. And that has been the ethos that's endured since 2009.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for that. The other one, and a couple of people have asked this in the same way, but this idea, you talked about how you're promoting people and, you know, people managers versus managers, and that whole promotion process and making sure you're getting the best people into those roles. These people are wondering, what are the metrics? How are you doing that? How
Well,
you
actually,
yeah.
I cover that in the next piece. Actually, it's one of
Brilliant.
the points
Okay.
on it. Yeah. So.
Fantastic. So I think, I mean, clearly you were able to call people's what they were going to want out of it. And then the final one is coming from Catherine. So looking for advice on establishing trust in environments prone to compassion fatigue. So this idea between leadership and the bridge between leadership and emotional support. And I think at the moment they've got a lot of leaders who are probably find themselves more acting as counselors than leaders. And I suppose any advice around, you know, how to not become the I suppose the emotional crutch is the analogy she's used here.
Yeah, it's an interesting one that, and we do quarterly performance management, and so my thinking coming into the last round was that because of COVID, all our ratings would skew on the compassionate side of everyone is doing brilliant, but there was virtually no deviation. There was literally 1% and 2% deviations in it. You know, that's a month ago. I wonder would it change now? You know, we've had a not a catchphrase, but a descriptor of version 1 as a great place to work, not an easy place to work. That's been our line. That's the employer brand we put out there. And I think that balance of a focus on, look, guys, we have numbers that, you know, they are what sustain us. That's what will get us through this crisis. The closer we are to those numbers, the more we can sustain employment, sustain pay levels, sustain benefits, and come out the other side. So it's that balance between, you know, communicating that message to people so that people don't lose sight of, okay, it is shitty and we're all working from home and we're all tired and we're all everything, but not delivering the number is not going to help us. So we have to focus on both. And I think we've kept a good balance on that because of our quarterly rhythm, our metric culture. You know, we have the systems to support it. We have a lot of real-time data, and because we've always communicated numbers to people, so that they know the numbers are important.
Yeah,
I don't know if that kind of helps.
Yeah, and there's always been that, I suppose, upfront transparency piece from you guys as well.
Yeah.
Just so you know, Jarlath, we've had a stream of people coming in, love the caption. So I don't know if people are going to be nicking your employer brand now, but that's, yeah, definitely a lot of response to that.
Yeah.
And thanks for Catherine as well. Cathal, I know you had a question you wanted to put to Jarlath as well.
Yeah, Jarlath, just thinking about the psychological safety piece and encouraging the risk taking. So, so I guess, look, not always do risks pay off, right? So not every risk pays off. So just interested, Jarlath, in any of your insights around when a team tries something, it doesn't work out. How do we learn from that? How do we kind of move on from a team when we try something, it doesn't work out? Kind of what kicks in at that stage?
Yeah, and I think people can view, I think in the psychological safety, the risk taking is actually the small things, not big, you know, where there's a team of 10 people going off trying to build a new product for a quarter and it fails, because something like that has to go through a process whereby, you know, it gets approved and it's in part of the plan. But, you know, somebody should be able to decide whether or not something the customer asked them is chargeable, or in this case, if I didn't charge for this, I will get it back for the customer. If you don't have psychological safety and the customer rings with a query and the next thing they get a bill for that 30 minutes, that can break trust between you and the customer. But the person can turn around and say, well, that's how I was told to do my job. You told me to charge for everything. So it is in their small actions that they can, and that's where empowerment comes in, because if you have that trust and psychological safety, somebody feels empowered to say, actually, the right thing to do here is the following. And, you know, so and that's where our values come in, because one of our values is customer first. So if you're doing something that is in a customer first way, you're not going to get punished for it. And the CEO has always said that. In fact, he's always said, if you've acted in accordance with the values, you will not get punished if something goes wrong. So it is in those small things rather than the big areas of spend and the big areas of risk. And that's, you know, people making those decisions is where people get the sense of engagement from being empowered, rather than just following a set of protocols and procedures every day.
Yeah. Thanks, Jarlath.
Brilliant. Back over to you, Jarlath.
Okay. So some of the things, if I just, in relation to the points I've made up to now, what we have done, and, you know, so we survey quarterly. So we've done 50 employee surveys in the last 10, 11 years, including the Great Place to Work survey, and, you know, the feedback sessions and the follow-up. And what I say to people is, you know, it is one of the easiest ways to start building trust is to listen, to feedback, and then to act. And if you only take one thing from the survey and act and tell people you acted on it, you very quickly build trust. So the technology is there now. Like doing surveys annually, I think, is a waste of time, you know, and then you're feeding back 3 months later to people. The technology is there to do, you could do survey weekly to different parts of your organization. People should be surveying frequently, feeding back, acting on the feedback, and doing it locally. Because if you have a company of, like we are, 1,300 people, you know, and giving the average of 1,300 people, it's nearly a waste of time, because a group who are on a customer site of 40 people might be totally peed off with everything, and another group could be really happy. So you give the local feedback to the groups, and all the tech is there to do it. I think it's an easy win for people, because give you one takeaway: look at how you're listening to people, and do it more often, and feedback and act. Quarterly performance management, you know, from what I've heard from people, probably one of the key trust eroders in a company, between bell curves and forced ranking and managers not able to do it properly. You know, we've done quarterly performance management. We've invested in the technology again to underpin it, to streamline it, make it easy. We've invested in training the managers. We've invested in, you know, so lately we've rolled out psychometric profiling. So everybody, well, most people have done their profile, the whole thing behind it, to understand their preferences, how they work, so their manager understands how they work, and the conversation follows that, rather than a one size fits all, the manager reviewing. It is people understanding how they work, how they communicate with their manager, and building on that. We've never done bell curves, never done forced rankings, and I've never seen a curve that I wouldn't call normal. So I think people should look at their performance management and say, is there practices in our performance management that are eroding trust, and get rid of them, because I don't think people really asked what purpose is served by bell curves and forced rankings. And also I'd say look and see, are you really empowering people in the process? Because if they're being reviewed, they're not empowered. So what we say to people is, you reflect on your performance, and it's only if the manager disagrees that the rating changes. It is more about a learning process than it is about a review process, and that builds trust. Communications have always been a huge thing in version 1. We've always done the quarterly, but the communications in between that, and it's always about being open and honest. And I'll give you an example. In the latest crisis, we hit our Q1 numbers, but we said to staff, we're not paying profit share, because just to be prudent. And we'd probably take the same approach in Q2. I don't know, we'll look at the numbers. But we didn't use COVID just to say, because of COVID, we're not paying profit share. We were transparent and said, we did our numbers, but we're going to be prudent, because at the end of the year, we might all be thankful to have something extra. So I think it's not just about staged communications. It's not about spin. It's not about putting your best foot forward. Of course, you have to put your best foot forward, but you've got to be transparent and open. And we share our numbers, we share our plans with people, so that you know what we're doing and where we're going. The core values I've touched on. It is so important that they're actually lived and built into your processes, from job ads to hiring to promotions to recognition. We have various award schemes for calling out exemplars of the core values. The CEO probably spends most of his time talking about core values, be that operations meetings, exec meetings, board meetings, or inductions. He spends most of his time talking about them. So I would say to people, look, and if they're just on the wall, take them down, and start again. But you really, my takeaway for you would be to look at the core values, say, what more can we do? If they're the right core values, what more can we do to build them in to what we do every day, so that people are living them every day? Back to your question on promoting those with the most competence. Our senior manager process, and we have over 50 of them, it's a year-long process. So you're proposed to enter the process. So that's the first gate. And then once you enter the process, there are gaps identified, there are objectives put in place and plans, a mentor is assigned. So you go through that process. The quickest is probably 6 months. It can be a year or longer. And, when you do the final interview, it is about really that interview is about what did you learn in the year and how have you changed compared to a year ago. And that interview is probably 5 to 10% of the decision. The rest is what happened during the year and how the person engaged the process, how they developed and learned. And that is how we have dealt with, not just promoting the people who appear to be the fast trackers, who are the best career managers, who know how to influence the CEO, who can do really brilliant interviews. It's to go through that learning process, and that ensures, you're still going to get the odd one wrong, but it ensures that you at least have a rigor in the process around developing leaders who are living the core values, who are exemplars for them, who know and are competent in their area, and who have learned how to manage people. The communications are one thing I'd say is on communications, and I think a takeaway for people, because I've seen it a lot, is where people are trained to be brilliant presenters, and I think that that results in a lot of plastic presentations. And I think, you know, go back and look at how you can create more authentic communications from your people. Certainly, there wouldn't be too much plastic presentation in version 1. It's a bit rough and ready sometimes, but the one thing that always comes back is how authentic the message is. So I just think, you know, maybe a world of spin and a world of low trust, authenticity is a whole new value now, and you will get a lot more from that than from polished presentations. So the vulnerabilities are really important one. Again, in terms of building trust, it's well documented. You know, Q3 last year, our CEO stood up at a quarterly briefing in front of 1,200 staff and said he doesn't do performance reviews because he doesn't have a boss. But he said if he was doing a performance review, he'd rate himself as needs improvement because he took his eye off the ball in Q3 and he was accountable for numbers slipping. So that was a massive admission of vulnerability, and it was really well received by people. You know, in terms of the COVID crisis, you know, when I was doing the calls with people, you know, when it got to it, I was like, I'm really pissed off with this, and I'm finding it a struggle in terms of mental resilience, and just, you know, showing people that it was okay to be not okay in a very strange situation, locked in your home and still trying to work. Previously, we had a director who stood up and said he'd been battling depression for 2 years, and he got 30 contacts from staff after that. And that's when I'd say we only had about 300, maybe 350 people, but that vulnerability drew out people who had issues or wanted to talk to him about it. So I think it's a huge one in terms of the authenticity as well. I think back to the psychological safety, there's a bit in you know, pushing employees to go beyond themselves and to be their best, and not having time-based promotions. And, you know, so we have things like, we have a top talent program, we have a shadow board for the, you know, the under 30s who are you know, up and coming. You know, we have very active rotation so that people don't stagnate in their skills. We have a program called Pathways, which is about career management and just constantly pushing yourself on. So I think it's a really important thing in terms of, if people see that you want them to be their best and you're trying to help them to be their best in building trust. I touched on it earlier, leaders see the whole person, and we're 1,300 people, but we've done 10 acquisitions, and the 10 acquisitions have been generally around 50, 60 people, where the founder really cared about the people. And in version 1, Justin and Tom and John and myself, you know, when we were a small company, really cared about the people. So we've actually brought that with us, and our leaders do care about the people and what's going on in their family life, what's going on, what challenges they have. And I think definitely through COVID, I know one day the CEO rang about 30 people, and like what he knows about them just from memory, because he genuinely cares. So the leaders, you know, going beyond the how are you performing in your job working from home, but getting into how your family or your kids, I know your wife has a condition, it's hugely important in building trust. And then the last thing is continuous improvement. You know, and I've kind of mentioned this through all the things, but look at your processes, look at what you do, look at your communications, look at your strategy, look at the impact of your HR department, and look to see how you can put in a continuous improvement to just keep moving the bar up. Because, you know, when we looked at, we had a very good performance management, but when we looked at it, there was a lot of trust erosion in there that I didn't see, and that then stemmed us on to go and improve it and develop it. So there is a lot of stagnation because a lot of your processes are probably in place for a long time, and to look at their applicability now and to look at them from how are they eroding trust. So the result of that is, you know, this is our Q1 and here are our key scores. So we do measure trust, we measure empowerment, we have psychological safety and employee experience. So we have questions that across each of those. As you can see, the scores are super. Like we're, you know, probably showing you our best set of scores, but we're always around the 80% mark. And then we get, you know, we can drill into that and get comments that point where we need to go, but also we can drill down into 30 different teams or groups of people. So some teams will be probably 92% and some teams are 62%. So we can drill in and work with that manager on why is trust low in their team. And it might be because of a particular client they're working on, or it might be something the manager is doing. So we can work on that. You know, our COVID, I think this is a real measure of the trust. Like we're up in the 90% in terms of how we're dealing with it, how we're communicating with it. But that question, I trust the version 1 leadership to get us through this challenging situation, 90%, I think it's probably the ultimate measure of trust in a very, very difficult time. So I think I'm probably on time or just out of it. Throw it back to you, Fanny, for other questions.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks so much, Jarlath. And thank you. I mean, a lot of the elements coming in are people saying thank you so much for being so candid and upfront. And people are really getting a lot in the level of detail that's coming from your side. One relatively procedural question: which psychometric profiling did you use?
We used the Thomas International, and we have, I think, over 900 staff have done them. So most people have engaged with it and get huge insight. You know, just a quick note, like we'd see it as the ultimate in diversity, you know, that every person has their own style, their own preference. And what we've found is that it's a brilliant tool for helping people to understand the other person's approach to work, or why you might disagree with another person's point of view because they're coming from a different profile than you. So we've been doing it for probably 2 years, but the last 6 months we put a lot of focus on it. It's been really valuable.
Brilliant, thank you. Someone asking around, when you're talking about kind of the positive relationships and creating those positive relationships, and then asking about the inevitable, you know, there's a couple of maybe naysayers or more negative people, and have you got any advice around kind of how you work with that group when you're looking at engagement? Yeah. Well,
I think 2 things. The positive relationships, I think, you know, you may have seen on the slide there, one of the core values is no ego. And it's probably the #1 reason that senior managers who have failed in version 1. Particularly some we've hired in externally who just couldn't adjust to it. And I think that no ego just means you're respecting people and you're on the same level as people. And that is the biggest thing, I think, towards building positive relationships. In terms of the naysayers, I always think if you get 85% in any survey, you've really got 100%, because it's 10 to 15%. And one of the things I've always told my teams is always think of the 85 to 90% positive people and ignore the naysayers, because you're going to invest so much of your time and you're still not going to make them happy. But the 90% that are happy, you can make them much happier with a small action. So I don't know if it helps not, but ignore them is what I would say.
I think I know something we always talk about is if you go and try and fix that group, you lose the rest of the people, because it's where your performers were engaged, and you know that's where you're putting your focus, really. You know. So I think it is being upfront about that kind of stuff as well. I know we've got a stream questions coming in. I'm going to do one more from the general piece. I'm going to hand over to Cathal then. I'm just conscious of time. It's now 5 to 11. Somebody asking, on your quarterly survey, do you vary the questions quarterly? Do you try and keep some core ones in there? How do you generally run?
Yeah, we've core ones in there, and then so last quarter is a good example. We had our core questions, and then we had questions on COVID, because that's the most topical. So we asked questions. Last quarter the previous quarter we'd asked on performance management, because we'd made the changes to it. So if we do something different, we will use the survey to reflect on how we did it and where we could improve. But then there's core questions to give us the scores on trust and empowerment and psychological safety.
Yeah. Cathal, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have loads of questions, Jarlath, but I'll stick with one, right? Because I'm conscious of time. And actually, just really quickly on the chat there, Jarlath, I just saw Stephanie from Retail Emotion. She asked, what's your HR to people ratio?
Okay, so if I include L&D in recruitment, or just pure HR and employee experience, so we have recruitment is a big part of us. So we actually have a team of 8 recruiters, and they're kind of a separate function. And then if you include L&D, HR and employee experience, it's about 12 people to 1,300.
12 people to 1,300. Okay, hopefully, Stephanie, you got, thanks for the question. So just, Jarlath, we have a mixed group of organizations and our participants on the call. You're 11 years into your journey. If you're starting off now, year 1, you have a Drucker CEO who's good at the quotes, but maybe doesn't play into the substance behind it. What's the non-negotiables in terms of building trust from your point of view? Where do you need to start?
Wow.
Taking you back 11 years ago.
Well, so 11 years ago, our survey results, so there was a question, this is a psychologically safe place to work, got 36%, I think. We had a lot of scores in the 40s and then some in the 50s. So I think the place we started was confronting the brutal truth that we weren't a great place to work, and understanding, number one, why, and then number 2, agreeing between, at the time, Tom, who's the current CEO, Justin, who was the CEO then, and myself, the 3 of us agreeing, what did we want to build over the next 10 years? And believe it or not, we did take a 10-year view in it. And that's where we came up with the strategic triangle. And so I suppose once we confronted the brutal truth, and then we crafted a strategy, which was the equilateral triangle and all sides being equal. From that set the path then, because, you know, it was in the strategy. I had plans. I would be held to account on the plans. I'd update the plans. We surveyed frequently, etc. And you've read all the culture audits, so you know what we did in the time as well. But that's where I would start, confronting the brutal truth. And if your CEO doesn't want to confront the brutal truth, there's nothing really you can do about it.
Yeah, sounds like a come to Jesus.
Yeah.
Final question, and guys, we're going to have to wrap it up there. But looking into the crystal ball, Jarlath, Catherine's asking you to look ahead. So, do you feel kind of HR is going to change as a result of COVID? And is there anything in particular HR should be focusing on when looking at that rebuilding organizations when people return to work?
Yeah, and in Q4, we actually set a strategy of becoming a best digital workplace. And so just an interesting one, we did physical briefings, you know, so the CEO would stand up and talk to people in different locations. But when we did the numbers, we were hitting about 400 out of 1,200 people. And there's a practice we thought we did brilliantly, but all the people who were on site, the people who worked from home, which in the UK is 50% of the people, weren't seeing them. So we just moved that to digital, and all of a sudden everybody had the same access at the same time. So that was quite prescient because COVID hit. But I think the challenge for HR, well, certainly the challenge I've undertaken since COVID, is how do I build the best digital workplace? And all of the fallout from that of isolation, of working from home, of, you know, everybody knows the challenges. Few of us know how to fix them yet, but I think HR has to own it, has to drive it, has to come up with a strategy for it. You know, my fear is we'll get sidetracked into all the policies and procedures around taking temperature coming in the door and desk space and all of that. But I think where we really need to focus is on how do we continuously keep people engaged, mentally sane. You know, And like one of the things we talked about is people finding it hard to see their impact now because they're not in the office, so they're just on a screen all day and they don't feel the same impact in their work. So there's a lot of softer sides to it we need to work on in HR. I think it's going to be a big challenge, and I think the economic fallout would present us with another challenge in the latter half of the year as well.
Brilliant. I am aware it is 11 a.m. and I can see people obviously have other meetings and that kind of thing to go to. So first of all, to say thank you very much, Jarlath and Cathal. I think actually Michelle has summed it up really well here. Thanks to Jarlath for his honesty. Often people in your position are eager to position the positive only, and very refreshing to hear you speak about the reality. So I think that almost perfectly sums it up. So thank you very much, Jarlath.
Yep.
Thank you, Cathal. And
thanks to you.
Everyone for being with us, for their time, and we look forward to welcoming you all back next week. So yeah, great. Thanks very much, everybody.
See you next week. Thanks to all.
Thanks, Jarlath.